Welcome to Blue Zone. In this video, I'm going to cover carrier ops, launch and departure procedure for case 1, 2, and 3, recovery and approach procedure for case 1, 2, and 3, landing tutorial, and familiarization with radio communication. This video is based on a document that I have put in the description. I encourage you to read it to fill the gaps, and also read the CNATRA, which is widely available out there to get the full picture. The objectives. So we're going to learn carrier ops, the launch and recovery procedures, and the launch and recovery tutorial based on these procedures we will go through. Why do we care? If you fly in a squadron or aspire to join a squadron that takes carrier ops seriously, you probably want to know what's expected of you and how it works. And you'll use it anywhere as you fly around a carrier. Let's talk about carrier ops. So there are zones around the carrier, and the carrier control area is it controls all flights within 50 nautical miles of the carrier, except the smaller area which is under control of the air boss, and provides departure and approach control at night and in bad weather. The carrier control zone, it's a smaller zone. It controls all flights within 5 nautical miles of the carrier up to 2,500 feet. And it's under the control of the air boss. Now let's take a look at the carrier. What I want to point out here is that some terminology that you'll hear and you should be familiar with. The port side is always left. So if the ship is moving forward, the left side is called port and the right side is called starboard. In this diagram, what I want to point out is that you see there are four catapults, and notice the order they're put in, whereas the number 1's on the starboard side all the way up to number 4 on the port side. Now behind the cats you will see that there are 4 wires, and when we land we are attempting to reach the 3 wire, and we want to basically hit our hook on this postage stamp just before the 3 wire to catch it. Another part too that's important in the carrier is that you have the lens, optical lens system, which is located around the ship here, and this is what you're going to use to when you land on the carrier to make sure that you're on slope and that you get the 3 wire. Another important place to know is the LSO platform. When you're doing your pattern around the boat, you want to be lined up. Once you're lined up with the LSO platform, which is your beam position, that's where you'll start your turn. The carrier normally travels at 30 knots, so once you hit the platform, you start your turn, and it should be nice and on time. It should be a 15 to 18 seconds from there before you land. And lastly, on the carriers in the FSX and VR Superbug, the elevator number 3, which is located on the starboard side, is actually a functioning elevator. So if you place your aircraft on there, it'll probably go down to the hangar. Just be aware. And the island is where the air boss actually sits. And these here is another picture with different names of areas on the ship, just so that you're familiar with some of the terminology. The one I want to point out is the crotch. So if you look at the crotch here, this angle here is what's important. When you land, because the ship is moving forward and your deck is angled 10 degrees on the port side, as the ship moves forward, your landing zone appears to be shifting on you to the right. So when you're landing, you probably want to point your, not probably, you should point your aircraft to the crotch area so that by the time you hit the deck, it'll center, and you'll see that in our demonstration. Carrier equipment. So there's arresting wires, and this is what stops the airplane when you land, providing you have your hook down. We have 4 wires, and our target is to hit the 3 wire. You have catapults, and referred to as the CAT. You also have 4 of those, and it's used to launch your aircraft. One thing you need to do is adjust your speed based on your weight, and we will cover that. You also have the TACAN, which is a Tactical Air Navigation System. It's also referred to as Father. It provides navigation to Mother, which is a carrier. Mother is a name used for the carrier. If you're asked to mark your father, what they're simply saying is asking you for your bearing and DME to the carrier based on your TACAN reading. Instrument Carrier Landing System, ICLS, is essentially a system that provides instrument landing system information to your ship, and we will see that in action in a video. Improved Fresnel Lens Optical Landing System, IFOLS. This is the meatball. This is what you look at when you land. And here is the IFOLS configuration. If you look at this diagram, the actual orange ball is what you'll be following. That so when you call the ball, that's what you're following. And your goal is to put that ball lined up with the datum lights. Now, if you see the red lights flashing, they're wave off lights. That means that you're grossly off pattern and you should abort your landing. You should probably you should always make sure that you follow the ball, and it's better to be a little bit higher than lower. If you're low and you hit the deck, you're gonna die. If you're at the right level, you get 3-wire, and if you're too high, you might get a 4-wire or be forced to bolter, which is an expression meaning that you miss the wires and you have to go around again. Now here's the IFO's glide slope. So if you look at the glide slope, the green area is where you should be. So you have about 1.5 degree to play with. But notice as you're coming in, this area is getting smaller and smaller. So therefore, the closer you get, the less chance you have to make corrections to be right on the ball. So you want to make a minute adjustment when you're getting close. Most likely you'll be using throttle to do that. Now when you're coming in for a landing, you will see that the center line, it works the same way. You get the 1/2 degree tolerance here to be center on the line, and as you get close, as you can see, that gets pretty narrow. So you want to get a good pattern so you can line dead center. As a rule, it's easier to recover and better if you're more to the starboard side or the right side of the ship rather than be on the left side. You want to be in the center, but if you're going to be in a bad position, it's easier to recover when you're on the right side of the ship. Okay, some recommendations for the meatball. So you try to attempt to fly the crescent ball, and what they mean by that, because on a glide slope, higher is better than low. If you're low, it's dangerous. If it's high, the worst case, you'll bolter. So what they mean by the crescent ball is that you want to try to fly the balls is just slightly above the perfect lineup. Never lead low and slow, or slow, and that's self-explanatory. So if you're too slow or too low, it's not good. You're gonna have problems landing. And the opposite is true. Always lead high or fast. So it's better to be a little bit faster, a little bit higher. If you're low and slow, you correct the low first. In other words, you use your stick to bring up the attitude of the airplane. And then once you've done that, you add more power. If you're high and fast, you reduce your speed first with the thrust, and then you do a little bit of a attitude adjustment with your stick. Fly the ball all the way to the touchdown. That is important because it's very easy to get off track, especially if, as you saw, there's very narrow margins. Never recenter high ball in close. So when you're in close, you want to stop the ball from rising. So in other words, you probably want to reduce your throttle. Don't do any pitch change with your stick. You're going to be way off. Okay, let's talk about flight deck operation. So there's a term called cyclic operation. As the term implies, it's a rotating operation. So there's cycles to it. So it's organized in a daily airplane, and which consists of 24 hours, and then the airplane is divided into events. And the events, on average, will be 1.5 hour, 1 plus 30 hours, and it's about 16 per day. Now, some events may be shorter, and some events may be longer. It varies. So here's an example of cycle, how it's used. So the first cycle, event 1, launch aircraft that are slated and scheduled for event 1. The second cycle, you launch aircraft in event 2 that are planned to fly to launch on event 2, and recover aircraft from event 1 to refuel, rearm, etc. The third cycle, event 3, the aircraft from event 3 are launched, and event 2 aircraft are recovered. And then the cycle continues. Weather criteria. So let's look at some terminology. You have a VMC and IMC. So essentially it's similar to VFR and IFR. So it's visual conditions and instrument conditions. Now the cases of, let's look at the case of launch and recovery. First of all, they're determined by the air boss. The air boss decides, are we doing case 1, case 2, or case 3? It's based on whether it's instrument conditions or VFR conditions. It's also based on distance of visibility. And it's based on the height of the clouds. And it's based on the time of day. It's actually 30 minutes after the sun rises and 30 minutes before the sun sets is considered nighttime or IFR. Okay, let's look at the flight deck operation case 1. So it's a day ops and it's VMC condition. The cloud ceiling has to be 3,000 feet or higher, and visibility needs to be 5 nautical miles or more. In a case 2 type of operation, it's day ops. Cloud ceiling is 1,000 feet or higher, but less than 3,000 obviously, and visibility has to be 5 nautical miles or more. Normally it's called when there's an overcast layer present. So the key thing to note here is that case 1 and case 2 is basically when you get at the boat, you will do an overhead brake in case 1 and case 2. But the approach on case 2 is going to be different than the case 1 because of the weather above 1,000 feet. And in case 3, it's night or day ops when you're in instrument condition. The cloud ceiling is below 1,000 feet or it's nighttime. Visibility is less than 5 nautical miles. And as I was saying earlier, 30 minutes after the sunrise or 30 minutes prior to the sunset will decide on the case 3. Pre-flights. Okay, some of the pre-flights to know. You get a briefing in preparation for the mission. So you get your departure radio, and you also, if it's an instrument condition, the weather and the case operation is discussed and what it's going to be. And the pilots are reminded of the important things like turning off the anti-skid, wing fold, auto trim, hook bypass, and set to carrier, etc., etc. The taxi.
99, clear to start your engine.
So the Airbus is called for the engine start. So you need to get clearance to start your engine on a carrier. Your nav lights, strobe lights, and landing lights should be off when operating on a boat. You check your gross weight and set your catapult speed. We will go through that and we'll demonstrate how you set that up on FSX.
102, gross weight 44,200.
So when you're ready to taxi, you radio with your weight. On a carrier, they would actually adjust the catapult based on your weight. In FSX, we have to set our own. And normally it's going to be around 153 knots unless you're heavily loaded with armament or fuel. And once you're all set, then follow directions from yellow shirt to taxi to your catapult. So now here's the gross weight chart. So as you can see, if you're less than 57,000 pounds, your speed is going to be set to 153. Now that is assuming that you're departing at mil power on the catapult. And as your weight increase, so would your speed change on the catapult. Now if you're taking off with full burners at 59,000 to 61,000 pounds, you would set to 153, and so on and so forth. So that's the chart. Pre-launch procedures. So you taxi to the cat, and you'll be assigned cat 1, 2, 3, or 4. Yellow shirts will guide you. You extend your launch bar, and the launch bar goes down. Then you taxi onto the cat with the launch bar extended, and you're locked into the cat. The next thing we do is we set the throttle to military power. Now at this point we're locked into the cat, so the plane's not going anywhere. And what we look for is for warnings or anything that needs corrected. So you check for good tension. So in other words, you should not go forward, you should stay in place. Make sure your auto trim is set. You'll get a warning if it's not. Make sure your wings are unfolded and locked, and your anti-skid is off. And the launch bar, at this point you can retract the launch bar. You do a wipeout, which is basically trying to look for issues with the control surface. So you go, you take your stick and go through all the different positions and your rudder, and make sure you don't get any warning or on your DDIs. And the last step is you salute the catapult officer, hands off the control, and hang on. You're in for the ride of your life. Okay, so let's look at a pre-launch and launch off the ship. Okay, so we're gonna go to the catapult. And if you remember, there's catapult 1, 2, 3, and 4. In our case, we'll go to catapult 2. Now one thing to keep in mind is you want to proceed very slowly, and watch for the yellow shirt giving you instructions. So let's proceed to the catapult. Extend our launch bar and go slowly. And get hooked up. Okay, so we have a launch bar hooked up. Now we have a few things to do. We have to announce our weight under the check option. 42,7 is our weight. So we announce your gross weight 42.7. Now, because we're in FSX, there's no catapult officer, so you have to go and change your own speed. And in order to do this, you go into the miscellaneous menu and go into the carrier option and go to the end speed, enable, and change the end speed Most of the times give it 153. It's in the NATOPS. You can check it out and adjust it to your weight. In my case here, I'll put it 153. Okay, so my catapult speed is set. Next thing I'm going to do is to put my, make sure my wings are unfolded. And obviously we're going to have no skid on and carrier. Now the next thing we're going to do is increase power to 90%, and we check for the shoes with the engine. Now notice how it's wanting to have the trim. Set our auto trim, and we can retract the launch bar. This way once we take off it will retract. Next, the yellow shirts are watching the planes. We're going to do wipeout, which is using all the different surface, the control surface, and to ensure that they're correct. So under the FCS, we'll do all the control surface, including the rudders, and all is good. So now we look at the yellow shirt, we salute, and we're catapulting. Let's look at the departure procedures. We'll start with the case 1, and as you can see, the ship is heading on a BRC, which means base recovery course. That is the actual magnetic direction that the ship is sailing. Not to be confused with the final bearing, which would be an indication of the actual runway direction. So the first thing you do when you take off off the cat, you do a climbing turn, and what that is basically an S turn. So you climb to your 500 feet, turn right about 20 degrees, and then turn back to the original BRC, and that's a clearing turn. And that is done because numerous aircraft are taken off in short succession, and you want to clear out of the way for the aircraft. You go to 500 feet at 300 knots indicated, all the way up to 7 nautical miles, 7 DME. And once you actually gone past the 7 DME, you climb on course and VFR, you're good to go. Now let's look at case 2. Slightly different. You'll recall that case 2 has low clouds between 1,000 and 3,000 feet. And also the visibility is 5 nautical miles. So the procedure is slightly different. So you do have a clearing turn, and you also have the 7 DME at 500 feet at 300 knots indicated. But now here's where it's different.
Departure 302 arcing.
So now you need to do an arc to your final assigned radio. So you start doing arcing at 7 miles, and you do a 10 nautical mile DME arc.
Departure 302 established outbound.
So once you get on your assigned radial departure, then you basically call the tower and let them know departure established outbound on your radio that was assigned to you. All this is predetermined before your flight begins. Let's take a look at the case 3 recovery, case 3 departure. So case 3 departure, nighttime, bad weather, low visibility, totally different.
Departure 302 airborne.
So you take off, and there's no clearing turn. Now the aircraft departures are spaced further apart. So you travel to 5 DME, and you should be 1,500 feet or higher, and at 300 knots. Once you go beyond the 5-mile DME, or once you pass the 2,500 feet,
Departure 302 passing 2.5.
so once you pass, you call the departure, let them know that you passed 2,500 feet.
Departure 302 arcing.
And the same as in case 2 here, you will be doing an arc starting at 7 DME up to 10 DME and looking to get established on your outbound radial assigned.
Departure 302 established outbound.
So that's it for the actual departure. So now let's take a look at a case 2 departure and see how that would work. Okay, so let's go and get this case 2 departure on the way. First thing first, I have my outer trim. Good tension and good power. Good wipe out. And launch. First thing first. Gear up. So we're looking to get speed and 500 feet. That's our target altitude. Okay, so now I have my flaps up. Time for my check turn. 20 degrees. Now I've reached at 20 degrees. And I go back to my 90 degree. And I constitute my S-turn. My check turn, I should say. So I'll let the speed get away from me here. Now we just maintain this until 7 miles. And at the 7-mile mark, we start doing our arcing. So we'll be arcing to get our bearing pointer all the way to our 3 o'clock. And once we reach 40 degrees, or close to 40 degrees on the bearing pointer on our data block, then we start going towards our 220 heading, which will be the 220 outbound radio. Okay, we're approaching on our 7 nautical miles from the carrier. Now we're no longer bound by altitude, so we can pick up some altitude, but let's do our turn to get our arcing going. Keep an eye on the bearing indicator. We want to have it at 3 o'clock. Our 10 o'clock, or 10 miles is coming up, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Okay, there we go. Now we start arcing. We essentially are going to keep arcing until we get our 040 on the bearing block here, which will be our basically our 220 outbound radio. I'm going to turn tighter to get back towards the 10 miles. Now if you're not familiar with arcing, feel free to watch my basic navigation video where I talk about arcing. crossing 330. Now, if you're familiar with the navigation concept, wherever my bearing pointer is, the opposite side of it would give you the outbound radio. Okay, we're at bearing 15 degrees. We're getting close. Degrees. And 30 degrees, so we can now start heading towards our command heading bug and grab our 220 outbound. And we just follow the command steering and it will take us our 220 outbound. So we're on the 220 outbound and that is it. That's our case to departure. And we depart. And so next we're going to be looking at some other different concepts of carry-ups, so hang tight. We're going back in the classroom. Here's what a case 1, case 2 landing looks like at the boat. Now normally those landings are performed zip-lip, which means that there's no radio calls made. You're expected to follow this exact pattern every single time, and everybody else in your flight should know exactly what to do. Except if you're doing a carrier qualification, then you'll be doing the calls so that you're basically showing that you know exactly where you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to do, and the conditions that you're in. Now in this diagram we see two different things. We see a lap around the boat, and we also see an overhead brake. So we'll start with the overhead brake, because the lap around the boat, the only difference is that you take off from the carrier and turn downwind at 600 knots, and you already have your gear down, you already have your flaps down, and then you put your hook down after takeoff. So let's look at the overhead brake itself. So you're coming in at 800 feet, 300 knots, and at 3 nautical mile astern, which is behind the ship, you basically call your on initial. At this point you're following the BRC, the base recovery course, which is a parallel course to the carrier. So you do your 3 nautical mile call, and then you go all the way up to 1 mile past the carrier. Now at 1 mile past the carrier you will start a brake turn. So you do a level brake at 800 feet. What that means, you turn 65 to 85 degrees and you maintain 800 feet, and your goal is to pull some G's to take some airspeed down so that you can lower the gear.
302 braking 1 mile.
So now once you brake the 1 mile and you start turning, you lose your airspeed down to 250, you lower your gear, lower your flaps, lower your hook, and you keep turning until you reach your downwind reciprocal. and you should be at 600 feet on speed, and I will show you what on speed means. And you should be ready to go.
302 downwind.
So now you're traveling downwind parallel in the opposite direction of the carrier, and you're traveling downwind until you reach the LSO platform. The LSO platform is where you are abeam, meaning that you should be between 1.1 and 1.5 nautical miles. Ideally, it'd be at 1.3 miles. And it's not going to be perfect every time. You'll learn to correct for slight differences. But once you're there, you make an abeam call.
Battles contact.
302 abeam, gear down, hook down, fuel state 6.8.
Now at this point you've made your beam call, and you start turning after you make your beam call with a 27 to 30 degrees angle of bank. And then as you turn, once you're behind the ship, you are at the, you'll see that on your tack end you're essentially at the 90 degrees. So you call your 90 degrees.
302 at the 90.
Now you're going down in altitude, and what you want to shoot for is be around 1 nautical mile, 400 feet. Now you go through the 45, which is essentially after you cross the wake of the ship, and then you get into position where you are 3/4 of a mile from the ship.
302, call the ball.
302 Rhino ball automatic.
Roger ball.
So now you notice I said automatic, and that means I have auto throttle on during my landing, which keeps my on speed. If I had it off, I would say manual. If I couldn't see the ball, but I was in this position, which is called the groove, then I would call Clara, meaning I don't have the ball yet. So let's take a look at some important shortcuts. The tail hook up and down, the shortcut key is Shift Q. Your launch bar extend and retract is Shift U. Your attached to the catapult is Shift I. And to launch the aircraft is Shift Spacebar. Now if you're going to do a lot of carrier ops, it would make sense that you map those to your joystick. If you don't have enough keys, you can always get a Tartarus device, which gives you a lot of additional keys that you can use. In fact, I just seen them on clearance at Walmart for something like $45. Another thing that's important to know. So we talked about reciprocal when you're coming downwind parallel to the ship. Well, in order to be downwind and be at the right position, you need to know what your heading should be. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but minusing 180 degrees is not something I can do in my head easily. So here's a little trick that I've picked up. Given a runway orientation, so let's say for example that we're on a runway 0 degrees, just keep it simple. So 0 degrees, as you know, is the same as 360. So if I have 0 degrees, and in this case here I add 200 degrees, so that gives me 200. I take away 20 degrees, it gives me 180. That is my reciprocal. So because I added 200, I'll take away 20. The opposite is true. If I remove 200, I need to add 20. So let's take a look at, if we look at it from a perspective of being 360. So if it's 360, it doesn't make sense to add 200. It'd be over 360, which is not a valid number. So I take away 200. So that gives me 160. Since I took away, I add 20. So that gives me 160 plus 20, 180. So for my runway at 360, my reciprocal would be 180. Let's take a look at another example. So I have a runway that's 234 degrees. Now 234 degrees, I take away 200 degrees, that gives me 34 degrees. 34 degrees plus 20 degrees gives me 54 degrees. So for a runway of 234 degrees, or a BRC of 234 degrees, my reciprocal would be 54 degrees. And let's take a look, one last example. So I have a 32 degree runway or BRC. So I add 200 that gives me 232 degrees. Since I added 200, I take away 20 degrees, and that gives me 212 degrees. So for 32 degree BRC, my reciprocal would be 212 degrees. So hopefully that's making sense for you. Now let's take a look at some landing tips. Start on land doing field carrier landing practice. Now there's a guy, you can look it up, Uchi World. This guy actually makes some scenery and whatnot, and he created some airports with FCLPs, which is a field carrier landing practice. Essentially what it is, it's a runway with markings that resemble a carrier, and he's put some IFOLs so that you can follow the ball all the way in. So it's a good way to practice on land. In fact, that's how they do it in real life. They practice doing a lot of field carrier landing practice in the airfield before they go to the ship. Use VLSO. Look it up on the web. VLSO is a donationware, and it will actually help you by showing you where you're doing wrong in your pattern. And there's all kinds of neat things in that software that helps you get a hang of doing a pattern. Now, the better your pattern, the better your landing will become. Aim to be consistent, a beam at 1.3 miles. So if you're consistent in your pattern, the rest will follow. So that's the critical part. So set your carrier to 30 knots into the wind, and that's the speed you should be using for your carrier. Use auto throttle to maintain your on speed, so that'll give you less to work with, make it a little bit easier. And once you get used to the actual pattern, you can start eliminating using the auto throttle if you wish. It's there for you to use. Nobody's gonna tell you can't use it. Map the important keys on your joystick. The gear, flap, hook, auto throttle, speed brake. Those are keys you use all the time, especially carrier ops. And use the ILS in daytime. That will give you a feel for the slope and the distance to the ship. So in the daytime, in the demos, I don't use the ILS or the auto throttle during the daytime, simply because I don't want to use it. So it's more challenging. But you definitely use it to get a feel for where you should be, what altitude, and so on and so forth. That will help you get your pattern down. And finally, practice, practice, practice. It would not be realistic for you to expect to go and do a pattern and after a day have it down pat and be bang on every time. If you do, you're a lot better than I am for sure. In any case, it's something that you need to practice all the time. In fact, when you go away from doing carrier landings for too long, you'll find that when you come back, it's a little bit challenging. So it's something you gotta do on a regular basis. So let's take a look at a lap around the boat and see what it consists of. So as we indicated, after the launch, right? In this case here, we're doing a lap around the boat, or it's referred to as mother. So we just finished launching. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we have our hook down. We go to 1 nautical mile. We're at 600 feet and on speed. So on speed, I don't know if you can see my AOA bracket here. You want to put your flight path marker inside the AOA bracket and towards the center. So I'm a little bit fast here. Once you reach that 1 nautical mile mark, then you want to start turning left at 30 degrees of bank. So you turn left 30 degrees of bank and you maintain your 600 feet. Now you're turning downwind towards your reciprocal. Now once you're downwind on your reciprocal, you stay level at 600 feet and maintain on speed. Now in this image you can see what on speed should look like. Now once you're lined up with the LSO platform, in this case here I'd probably go maybe just a little bit further. Then you start your turn and you make your beam call here. Now you turn between 27 and 30 degrees angle of bank, maintain your on speed, and start descending. Now remember, you want to be at the 1 mile mark around 400 feet. At least that's what works for me. You want to be as time goes by, you'll get used to what it should look like when you land on the carrier, and you'll be able to adjust. So let's say, for example, your pattern is 1.1 degrees a beam, then you probably want to turn a little bit more than 27 degrees. If your pattern is 1.5, you probably want to turn more towards the 27 degree itself, or maybe a little bit less, depending. So it's something that you'll get used to correcting. So we're turning towards the ship, and now we just crossed the wake, so we're at the 45. We maintain on speed and keep descending and aiming for our 400 feet at 1 nautical mile. Now when you're lined up with the ship, it's called in the groove. At the 3/4 mile mark, we will call the ball. Now we maintain on speed and follow the ball. This is the ball. It's hard to see, but when you look at the airfoils itself, if you're off, you will see some red. So you're either too low or too high. But you'll see red, and you can tell the difference between red and yellow. So if you see yellow, you're in good shape. So you get to the 3/4 mile and call the ball, and then follow it in. And as you get closer, you'll see it better. Unfortunately, that's a limitation of FSX. I'm sure in the real life they see it a lot better than this. Now you line up for landing. So you adjust the ball with the slight power changes when you're close. And what you want to do is line up to the right, or the crotch that we looked at in the previous slide. Reason being is the carrier is moving forward. As it moves forward in its BRC, your actual runway, which is 10 degrees offset of that, will keep shifting to the right. So as you aim towards the right, you'll see as you land on the ship, you will be in a center line. Now take a look at the ball. So we're right on the ball here. We're cresting just a little bit. So that's what they mean by cresting. You're not exactly in the middle, you're just slightly above. And then, bingo, you're on the deck, and you cut the 3 wires, and mission accomplished. So now for the overhead brake. The overhead brake, the only difference with the overhead brake is that we start our pattern 3 miles before the ship. So at 3 miles, 800 feet, 300 knots, and we're leveled. We're coming towards the ship on its BRC. Now, as we get at the 1 mile mark, we start doing a level brake at 800 feet. And what that means is 65 to 85 degree bank, and pull 2 to 3 Gs. What your goal is to bleed your airspeed to 250 knots so you can lower your gear. Now there's other methods out there that people use. Some people use speed brake, whatever's comfortable with you. I normally use the speed brake, but I didn't in my demonstration, just so that you keep it clean. And if you want to add the speed brake, be my guest. So we're reducing the airspeed to 250 knots. At this point, once you reach 250 knots, you get the gear flaps down, the hook down, you change your angle of bank to 30 degrees, and you descend towards 600 feet. And then you turn downwind, and you want to be level on your reciprocal on speed 600 feet. The rest is the same as what we just looked at. So now let's take a look at a lap around the boat, and then we'll do an overhead brake. Okay, we are heading over to the carrier. We need to check a few things before we get there. And let's start by first setting up the autopilot. I've already have the I already have my TACAN selected, and I'm flying my heading bug. I should say my command steering. And I'm going to turn on the autopilot. I want it to follow the TACAN and maintain my current altitude. So now it's going to fly for us towards the carrier. A few things we have to check before we get there. First of all, our weight. We need to be able to determine our weight. So the check button here will give you the weight. Now the weight is in here is 44,470 pounds. The maximum weight to land is 44,000 pounds. So we'll be fine. We still have 55 miles to go, so we'll be below the 44,000. If you do have to dump fuel, then you would go in this panel right here and lift that switch. Now it will give you an indication that you're dumping fuel and your fuel will start going low. And if you forget it, you'll end up with 5,000 pounds of fuel. So that's the first thing we check. The next thing we want to check is our actual lights themselves. So we don't want the landing lights on. The anti-skid should be off. And we should be set to carrier landing with this one here. Now the other thing we need to check is to make sure our lights are set up correctly. So for our lighting panel, if we look at our lights here, position light should be off, the strobe light should be off, and information light should be on. And this is the setup that we should have in order to fly to the carrier and be ready to go. So we're going to be okay on weight. Now the next thing we probably want to do is take a look and find the carrier and find out the BRC. We're making the assumption that we don't have a controller. So if I look at the actual radar and I change it to the C radar, you'll see that I have a target. Now you can put your TDC into the screen and it gives you the diamond, and then you just move your cursor over the ship and then lock the target. Now if you take a look at the target here, I don't know if you can see it well here, but it's saying it's going 30 knots and the BRC is 91 degrees. So that's one way you can find out your BRC. Now I'm going to unlock the target and I'm going to set my TACAN back and go back and fly towards the ship. So now we're 40 miles from the ship, and I will come back in a moment. Once we get closer, we fly our case 1 pattern. We're actually not going to do the holding pattern. I just want to cover the landing, the overhead brake and whatnot. .302 initial.
302, breaking 1 mile. .302 downwind.
.302 paddles contact.
302, being 3 green down and locked, hook down, fuel state 9.2. 302 at the 90. .302 crossing the wake.
.302 call the ball.
302 Rhino ball 9.2 manual.
302 roger ball. .302 downwind. .302 paddles contact.
302 being 3 gears down and locked, hook down, fuel state 10.4. .302 at the 90. 302 crossing the wake.
Three zero two 3/4 miles. Call the ball.
302 Rhino ball 10.3.
302 Roger ball.
Let's now look at arrivals and recovery. Now the arrival and recovery, essentially this is the pattern for a case 1 arrival and recovery. The way it works is everybody is assigned an altitude to enter the pattern beforehand. And you should be established on your altitude 10 miles prior. Now they show an entry point here on number 3 and number 4, but it's actually, you can enter in any place in the pattern at your assigned altitude. The pattern is essentially a left-hand turn, a continuous circle. The diagram here shows that you're going to the right of the ship, but in other diagrams that I've seen, you fly over the ship and go 5 miles in a circle. And the minimum altitude in the pattern is 2,000 feet, and there's a separation of 1,000 feet between each aircraft flights. So let's say, for example, that you have 2 aircrafts coming in and they go into the pattern at 2,000 feet. And so what they would do is they would space themselves 180 degrees apart. So maybe one would be on number 3 in the pattern, the other one would be on number 1. And if you have 3 people in the flight, then it would be separated by 120 degrees each, and to keep a distance. So you hold in the pattern and then it stacks up in 1,000 feet separation. Now one of the rule of the pattern is that between number 1 and 3 is when you would go up if instructed to increase your altitude. And between number 3 and 1, going the left in the pattern flow, is where you would descend to a different altitude. Now once you get your Charlie time, or once cleared by the air boss to start landing, so the lower planes on the pattern would be the ones to start coming out. And you're essentially coming out at around 210 degrees relative to the carrier. And you come out and you go out, they didn't put any number of miles that you would go out, but probably around the same, around 3 miles, and then start a turn. And then you perform your overhead brake, just like we've just seen. And that is essentially the case 1 arrival pattern and recovery procedure. Now let's take a look at the case 2 and case 3. So you'll recall that those are when we're in IFR condition, meaning that the weather is bad, it's nighttime, or what have you. You perform a pattern, and the patterns are expected to be 6 minutes long. So you have 1 minute per turn and 2 minutes per leg. So you'll see here that you're basically, in this case here, we're looking at it a CV1 kind of a approach, where you're behind the carrier. Now each aircraft is assigned an altitude that's 1,000 feet difference, and you'll see that they have different distance. Reason being is the way you're assigned your altitude and distance is based on the ship itself. 15 miles of the ship plus your altitude constitute what your distance should be. So we want to have 1,000 feet separation between each aircraft. So let's take the 6,000 feet example here. So 6,000 feet plus 15 gives you a distance of 21 nautical miles. And you'll see in the approach, everything is pre-calculated so that you have to do a very specific approach and descent to end up at the right place at the right time. Now in this case here you have a flight of 3. So if you had a flight of 3, the first one would be assigned 8,000 feet, 23 miles. The second one, 7,000 feet, 22 miles. The third one would be 6,000 feet, 21 miles, because you're traveling in that direction anyway. And then you do your pattern, as I indicated, 6-minute long pattern until you get your Charlie time, or you have a pre-assigned Charlie time. Now, Charlie time is the time you expected to do your landing. And it's important to keep those because as you sub the operation and the cyclic events, everything is timed. So you mess up the timing, you mess up the timing for everybody. So it's important to follow it. Now, if we look at the actual pattern, the descent itself, what they indicate here they're showing us a descent for a case 2 recovery. Now the case 3 is very similar. The only difference is instead of going to 800 feet to do your overhead brake, you actually go to 1,200 feet and stay at 1,200 feet. So the way this works is that you start your descent, you're going at 250 knots. And you start your descent 4,000 feet per minute. Now they say 4,000 to 6,000. Generally 4,000 feet is the accepted number that you use. And you keep descending until you reach 5,000 feet. At that point, it's called platform. So at the platform, you reduce your descent to 2,000 feet per minute. And you reduce that descent, and as you reduce this descent, you should end up at 1,200 feet before the 10 nautical mile. Now, at 10 nautical miles, you will be going dirty, which means you'll be putting your hook down, your gear, your flap, and gets on speed. So that's for a case 3. For a case 2, at 1,200 feet, you just keep going to 800 feet. And then once you get to the carrier in the case 2, you do your overhead brake. In the case 3, at 10 nautical miles, you take your gear down and so on and so forth. You go dirty, and then you follow your own speed all the way in. Once you reach 3 nautical miles, you will start your descent and land on the carrier. And we'll demonstrate that, and we'll go through the approach plate so you can see what it looks like. Okay, this is the most common one, the CV1 approach. And the CV1 approach essentially is what we just talked about. And you can see here in the profile, the IAF is your point where you start to do your descent. And you go to towards the final bearing, which should be announced to you by the tower. And if not, it should be the BRC minus 10 degrees. So you start descending, and you should reach 1,200 feet before the 10-mile mark. Once you reach a 10-mile mark, you go dirty and stay at 1,200 feet. And you keep going in, and then once you reach a 3 nautical mile, you start your descent towards the ship. In this case here, it says if you miss your approach or you bolter, you go up to 1,200 feet and to 4 DME before you turn back and get instructions. And when you turn back, you turn on the reciprocal. So that's the CV1 approach, and that's the one that most people use, or at least that's the one I've seen used the most. There's another approach, a CV2 approach. This one here is a little bit different, where instead of starting behind the ship, you are starting on the starboard side of the ship, and you have a pattern that you're flying. So for example, let's say your BRC is 90. The way to figure out where you should be in this pattern here is you take your outbound, your BRC minus 30 degrees. So that will give you 60. So that would be this leg here for 60. And you know how to calculate the reciprocal. So the reciprocal to 60 would be plus 200 minus 20. That gives you 240. So you'll be flying a pattern 240 and then 60. 240 and 60. And then once you get your Charlie time, then you start your IAF here. And you start your 4 DMEs away from the carrier. And you start flying to your 4 DMEs. And then you start your descent. Once you're here, you start your descent. And you want to end up at 2,000 feet here at around 10 nautical miles. And then you make your turn. And here you should be at 10 nautical miles, going dirty at 1,200 feet, and the rest is the same. Now, you're probably wondering, is there more approach? There is a CV3 approach, but this one is for helicopter. So that's the approach, the recovery, arrival and recovery in a nutshell. So now we're going to take a look at the Case 3 CV1 approach in the plane. Now if we look at our distance from the ship and our altitude, we know in Case 3 we need to take 15 miles plus the altitude. So at 24 miles we're going to start our descent. So now I got it locked into 250. So now on the radar we've determined that the BRC is 91. Since we have nobody in the towers and we know it's 10 degrees off, we're looking for 81. So let's change our TACAN course select to 81. Now what we can do at this point is couple our autopilot to get us on that course. So if you go to autopilot and you couple to TACAN, it will take us to our actual course select, and we're going to keep our altitude at 9,000. So click barometric altimeter and it locks it in 90-30, close enough. So now it's actually going to maintain that speed, get us on the course that we need to do our Case 3 profile. Now the first thing we're going to do is once we hit 24 miles, we need to go down to 4,000 feet per minute until we reach platform, which is 5,000 feet. And once we reach platform, we'll be slowing down our descent to 2,000 feet per minute until we reach 1,200 feet. Now our goal is to reach 1,200 feet before we hit 10 miles. Once we're at 10 miles, we will actually put our gear down, our flaps, our hook, and then go all the way in until the 3-mile mark, at which point we're going to start a descent to land on the carrier. Okay, we are slowly approaching here. So we need to make sure that first of all our TACAN is selected, and we do have that, and we have our ILS and it's on, and the frequency for the ILS for the ship. And we're good to go. We need to turn on the ILS so that the needles will come up once we get in range. Verify our weight, less than 44,000 feet, 44,000 pounds I mean. So we're good in that aspect. And now we're flying towards our carrier and fly our profile. Now I have auto throttle on, which is Control R, and that maintains that speed. Now as I start, I'm on the autopilot. If you've seen my other lessons, once we change the attitude, it will switch to flight path hold, which it will maintain the profile that it will maintain the attitude that we give it. As long as we don't do it too fast, it will actually leave the autopilot on. Okay, so we're ready to start our profile. I'm gonna put my speed brake on. And notice how it switched to FPAT.
Command saying.
The reason why I put my speed brake on is I want to maintain 250 knots. Now I'm hitting for 400 feet per minute. 4,000 feet per minute, that means. Okay, so we're there and that's close. Now notice I still have the autopilot. It's still flying me on that fine old bearing of 81. Now you just keep adjusting as the altitude changes, so will your descent rate. Now once we reach 5,000, we need to go to 2,000 feet per minute. So we're almost there. And we'll start slowly bringing it up.
.302 platform.
And right to 2,000 feet per minute. Now if you notice the indication of pitch ladder, it will be the same every time at that speed. Now we're maintaining this descent rate until we hit 1,200 feet. Notice how the speed brake and the ATC all the way through that profile kept us on speed. Now, of course you can do it without it. I'm just trying to show you the easier way to fly the profile so that you're accurate, and then you can work on removing those aids. But they're in the plane for you to help, in the plane to help you. So you should be able to use it if you want to. If you're more comfortable with it, then so be it, as long as you fly properly. Okay, we are slowly approaching. Okay, 1,200. That should have pulled up a little bit earlier. Our needles just came in. Now the ALS needles, when you see that there's, you need to fly to the needle until it centers, and then you recenter. So the indication we're getting here is that we're too far to the right and too low. We're supposed to stay too low until we hit 3 miles, and then we follow the needle. Okay, so we're on speed and 9 miles. It's time for our gear down. Flaps. And notice the ATC is flashing here. And do the hook. So take off the ATC and turn it back on, and it will put the ATC on speed. Okay, so it's going on speed. We still have our trusted autopilot on. We will take it off soon once we get around 5 miles, so we can do the actual flying by ourselves. So now I'm going to turn on the auto throttle, and notice how it tries to keep it on speed. At this point, you're just changing the attitude of the aircraft to land and following the needles at 5 miles.
.302, say needles.
302 flying up, on.
.302,
Now,
fly
one
your
thing to
needles.
note is that the ship moving away from you will always be shifting a little bit to the right because of the angled deck. So keep that in mind. It's very easy to be too far to the left. Okay, we hit the 5 mile mark. I took out the autopilot. And I'm going to fly towards the needle. And once it centers, you want to line up with the command heading. It's almost centered. Okay, we'll take it back in. Remember, we're not flying down until we have the 3 miles and the indication starts going down. Now we should be lined up properly. Okay, 3 miles. See how it's starting to go down? So start going down with it. And then let it catch up to center up. Once it hits the center, you go at about 3.5 degrees on the scale. You need to go a little bit to the right. Now we're centered on our glide slope. Okay, so it's centered now. Now once you hit 3/4 miles, you fly the ball.
Three zero two 3/4 miles. Call the ball.
We're flying the ball
302
now.
Rhino ball, 11.9,
So we're low.
automatic.
302 Roger ball.
More on the ball. Here you have it. 3 wires. Okay, we have now arrived at the last portion of our video where we're going to look at communication. My intent is not to make you a communication expert, but if you know what the communication means, you can actually ascertain what's going on. There's a great YouTube video out there with 2 hours of recording of recovery on a ship. So if you follow what I'm going to show you here, you should be able to understand what's going on in that video, which is no pictures, just radio talk. So let's get started.
Red Crown, 302. Mother's 250 for 75. Angel 17.
So what's happening here, there's an airplane. We are inbound, and we're calling Red Crown. And we're telling Red Crown that Mother, which is the carrier, is on our 250 bearing for 75 miles. So we're 75 nautical miles away from it, and we're Angel 17. Now this is a case 1 where we're coming in, and it's VFR condition.
302, sweet. Contact. Strike.
So Red Crown here is telling us sweet. Sweet, what it means is that the Red Crown is the first level of defense on a carrier group, and they're basically watching planes coming in. They challenge your IFF, which responds with a code, and what they're indicating by sweet is that the mode 2 code was correct and mode 4 code was correct. If one of those was not correct, they would say sour. So sweet means everything is good, and he's passing us on to strike.
Strike, 302. Mother's 250 for 55. Angels 12. State 2.4. No alibi.
So we're calling strike. We're telling them that we're on a bearing of 250 to the ship, and we're 55 miles away at angels 12,000 feet. Our fuel state is 2.4, and no alibi means we have no issues. Everything is cool. We don't have any failures to deal with or what have you. No emergencies.
302, sweet. Mother is VFR. Case 1, contact Marshall.
So strike is another level of defense, and they checked us also for mode 2 and mode 4. Now they're telling us the carrier is on the VFR, which is in case 1, so that we know what kind of a approach to expect, and they're directing us to contact Marshall.
Marshall 302, 250 for 52, Angels 9, state 2.4.
So now we're calling Marshall, and we're saying that we're on a bearing of 250, and at 52 nautical miles at 9,000 feet, and our fuel state is 2.4.
302, case 1. BRC is 015. Expected Charlie time 22. Report see me.
Okay, so we called Marshall, and they told us that we're going to do a case 1 recovery. The base recovery course is expected to be 015, and our expected Charlie time is 22, which means it's 22 minutes on the hour. And report see me means that report back once you have the ship in visual.
302, see you at 10.
So in this case here, we are at 10 nautical miles and we're able to see the ship, so we report that we see the ship.
302, switch tower.
Now 302 is directing us to switch to the tower, and we know the frequency already. So the rest of the case 1 is normally a zip lip, and sometimes you'll be under EMCOM, which is a mission control, so you minimal radio, minimal everything transmission wise. Now the zip lip will normally be the condition unless there's the weather deteriorates and they need to not go zip lip. Now let's take a look at a case 2.
Marshall 302, 250 for 42, Angels 14, state 2.4.
Now same thing here as we had in the previous example. So we're at, our bearing is 250 at 42 nautical miles, 14,000 feet, and our fuel state is 2.4.
302, mother's weather is 1500 overcast. Visibility 5 miles. Altimeter 29.87. Case 2 recovery. Marshall on the 160-22, Angel 7. BRC is 015. Expected approach time 22.
Okay, so that's a mouthful here, but basically she's saying the ship's weather, whose mother, the ship weather is 1500 overcast. So in other words, it's above 1,000 feet, which is a case 2. The visibility is 5 miles, which is still good for the case 2. Altimeter 29.87, so you need to change your altimeter. You need to change the altimeter to match what they're giving you, because so this way you have the right altitude. They're telling us it's a case 2 recovery. They're saying that they want you to go on a bearing of 160 and 22 miles away from the ship at 7,000 feet. They're also saying you should expect a base recovery course of 015, and your approach time is going to be 22 minutes after the hour. So this information is given to you. You're expected to repeat back to make sure that you understood it.
302, altimeter 29.87, Marshall on the 160-22, Angel 7, expected approach time 22. 302, established, Angel 7, state 2.3.
So when you're established on what they told you to be on, and you're at 7,000 feet, fuel state is 2.3. So you're basically telling them that you're in the pattern and you are holding. Now let's take a look at the case 3 communication, where it would be slightly different.
Marshall 302, 250 for 42, Angels 14, state 2.4.
So by now you know what that means.
302, Mother's weather is 600 overcast, visibility 3 miles, altimeter 29.87, case 3 recovery, CV1 approach. Marshall on the 160, 22, Angel 7, expected final bearing 015, expected approach time 22, approach button 18.
Okay, so there's very little new information here, except they're telling us that we're going to do a case 3 recovery and a CV1 approach using that plate that I was showing you where we are at the 180 of the ship, so behind the ship, and we do that kind of approach. The rest of the information is the same except for the approach button 18. The approach button 18 means that the approach frequency is on button 18, and button 18 would be a predetermined frequency that approach would be on, so you would select that approach frequency. Now, after we get that information, we need to confirm.
302, altimeter 29.87, Marshall on the 160, 22, Angel 7, expected approach time 22. 302, established, Angel 7, state 2.3.
So once again, we repeated with the information that was provided to us to confirm that we did understand, and then we let them know once we're established in a pattern.
99, altimeter 29.88, new final bearing 020.
So now the Marshall is saying 99, meaning all aircrafts, and altimeter 29.88. We were at 29.87, and that has changed. So the Marshall is telling us to change our altimeter, and our new final bearing is going to be 020 instead of the 015 originally they told us.
302, commencing 29.88, state 2.2.
So now our charter time came up and we're starting our penetration. So we call out commencing, meaning we're starting our descent, and our altimeter is set up to 29.88, and our fuel is 2,200 pounds.
302, Roger.
So Marshall confirmed that we're descending, so everything is okay.
302, switch approach, button 18.
So now she's telling us to switch to the approach frequency assigned to button 18.
302, switching button 18.
We're confirming that we're switching, and therefore she will not hear us.
302, checking in, state 1.5.
Now we're checking in with approach.
302, final bearing 017.
Now approach told us a different final bearing. If you recall, previously it was 020, so it's changed a little bit. The carrier has to be into the wind, so they may change a final bearing.
302, platform.
So we've done our descent and we reached 5,000 feet. So we had a descent rate of 4,000 feet per minute. We reached 5,000 feet. We call out platform. Right after we call out platform, we change our descent to 2,000 feet per minute to reach 1,200.
302, say needles.
Now we're flying at 1,200 feet. We've actually gone dirty at 10 nautical miles. We have our gear down, our hook down, our flaps down, and we are near the 5-mile mark, and approach is making sure that we can see our ILS needles.
302, fly up, on.
So here we're indicating that we have the ILS. We're at 1,200 feet. We need to fly up to be on the needle, and we're confirming needles are on.
302, fly your needles.
So approach confirming is confirming that he understands that we have our needles and we can fly our ILS approach.
302, 3/4 mile, call the ball.
So now we've reached 3/4 miles and he's telling us to call the ball.
302, Rhino ball, 2.0.
Now we're telling him that we have the ball and our fuel state is 2.0.
Roger ball.
And the LSO comes on and he actually acknowledges that we have the ball. So this concludes the video on carrier ops, launching, and recovery. I realized this was a long one, but there's so much to cover, and there's no way I could cover the whole thing in one video. I encourage you to go read those documents if that interests you. It's very informative, and it will help with your carrier ops. So if you liked the video, please click like and subscribe. I plan on doing more video. Thank you for the encouragements of the ones that subscribed and the ones that actually sent kind comments my way. I appreciate it. Have a great day. It's been fun. Take care.